Today we're going to talk a little bit about the command line, some of the benefits, some of the reasons why I like it, and hopefully it'll entice some of you to dig a little bit deeper and start to learn it and explore it quite a bit more, because there is so much power in it. Now, toward the end of the session, we get a little more advanced. We talk about binding scripts, we talk about access control lists and how to deal with them in command line. So this is meant to be a foundation level class, right? An introduction to it to try to get your feet wet a little bit. Also, if you guys want them, and please take them. I don't want to carry them back with me. We have screen wipes, which work great for glasses and sunglasses as well up here. Take as many as you want. We have mouse pads to take. Work great for coasters as well. Big coasters for big drinks, but work well for coasters. Yeah.
I can testify that the screen wipes are first quality.
We spent a lot of money on them. I go through them pretty quick. They're great. All right. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So, why do I use the command line? Why should you use the command line is the bigger question. Now, I had an engineer that did everything from the command line, and one time I decided to ask him, I said, Dan, why is it that you love the command line so much? Because some of the stuff he was doing could easily be done from the GUI and probably just as efficiently. And he said, because whenever there's a customer looking over my shoulder, as soon as I jump to the command line, they walk away and they leave me alone the rest of the day. I'm like, all right, I like that one. I'm going to keep using that. The GUI is like an automatic transmission, right? It does most of the work for you. You don't have to put a lot of thought into it. Sometimes you do, but it does most of the stuff for you. Whereas going to the command line is like a stick shift transmission, right? You have to think about when to change gears. You have to think about what you're doing at any given time. And the command line isn't as forgiving as the GUI is, but there's so much power, so much strength to using the GUI. It really makes it a benefit to you as an administrator to get to know it. And I'm going to teach you some resources where you can learn more about the command line and become more familiar, because there's a lot of free resources out there that are just excellent. Now, I had stated that we teach a lot of the certification classes, and what I've found is when we're doing the system administrator level classes, it's about half command line, half GUI. We show you how to do it in the GUI, then we show you how to do it in the command line. And I find that there's a lot of people that I lose as soon as we hit the command line side, but when they see, okay, they're doing the same thing, but look how much more efficient it is, they're like, oh, okay, I get it, right? So they end up learning a lot about command line that they didn't think they were going to through our classes. So it gives us advanced configuration and features that you may not see elsewhere. There's a lot of things that you can do from the command line that you may not know how to do from GUIs, though there seems to be an app for just about everything these days. You can run the command as a different user. So I can jump in as Russell and change over to administrator. I can elevate my own privileges to root user. Does everybody know the difference between an admin and a root user? The root user has the power to do anything they want in the operating system, including deleting the live operating system while you're working on it. It's not going to say, are you sure you want to do this? Right? It just does it for you. Much more efficiency. Right? Some of the very simple commands, if you're doing a get info on a window and waiting for it to spin and calculate, you'll find that a disk usage command comes up in about 65% of the time. It's just a lot faster and a lot more efficient. And then being able to do remote administration and troubleshooting is a real big plus in my book. So if you don't feel like getting out of your desk, getting away from your desk and walking across campus to work on something, I can always remote shell into somebody else's system and possibly do a fix for them. Okay? And this includes things like fixing printers. Right? We do the printers all the time this way. Mostly, I deal a lot with servers. Have any of you ever had a server that went dumb on you that you couldn't get into from the GUI? Right? So I leave it with SSH turned on servers so that I can hit it from the command line and kickstart ARD. If you haven't used that command before, look it up. It's a great command when ARD goes deaf on you. And it's happened probably to all of us at one time that it says it can't see the client. You're like, I know the client's on and I know it's awake. Why can't I hit it? Right? So ARD just possibly went deaf on you. 4 primary ways that we can get into command line. From the login screen, if you type in greater than console, it takes you to a command line shell. The most common way of getting into it is going to be launching the terminal app. They all give you the same power. Okay? Another way is to SSH into a system, so secure shell. Those are a little small, aren't they? By the way, I will make these slides available to anybody. If you just drop me a business card, I'll give you a link to the Dropbox. They're kind of large. I think it's 70 megs in size, so I can't email them to you. But I'll give you a link to the Dropbox, invite you in so you can download the curriculum. And it'll have the curriculum for my iOS mobility class that we did on Tuesday as well. So just you can leave me a business card or give me your email address, and my email address will be on here at the end as well. Okay, so greater than console, terminal, SSHing in, and we also have single user mode. If you haven't used single user mode, it is a great troubleshooting tool, right? When you're not able to get into a system, probably because you can't authenticate into it, being able to go into single user mode allows me to blow out directory services, basically killing my binding, and then I'm able to log in again. But without that ability, I'd have some difficulty trying to get to it. I'd still have to boot off another system. So instead of having to boot off another drive, single user mode is a great troubleshooting scenario. Now there's 6 basic shells that we can get into under OS X. And the default shell is Bash, or Born Again shell. This is real popular on the Linux side as well. But I've come across people that have been using Unix for 40 years. And they say, I don't like Bash, I like T-shell, or I like just shell, or C-shell. You can switch over to whichever environment is most comfortable for you. It's extremely rare that I ever have to change this for a user. Most of them say, yeah, okay, Bash, that's fine, that works for me. Okay, but you can make the change into any shell you want. Does everybody know where to make that change, by the way? If you haven't gone in under System Preferences, go to Users and Groups, and right-click or control-click on the user. It takes you to the advanced options, and from there you can change the shell. And there's a couple other ways to do it as well, but that's one of the easiest. So there's a couple things to note about any user shell that you're going to be in. And you can pull a man page. A man page is basically the manual on how to use that particular command. A lot of people say, well, how do I remember all this stuff about Unix? Nobody remembers everything about how the commands work. I jump to the man pages all the time when I forget, how do I do this inside of rsync? Right? And the man pages tell you exactly the usage that you can have with it and the syntax that can be used with it as well. But take a look. If I'm in a particular user, I have some hidden files that are located there, and you guys understand that anytime you see a period before a file name or a folder, that means it's hidden, right? So what I've got here is the ability to go in and take a look at this user's bash profile. I can take a look at the bash history. So if you've ever come across and you think there's a student that's been trying to hack at one of your servers, if they aren't wise enough to hide their tracks, go into their bash history. It tells you what they've been doing in there. Right? So you have some information that's given to you just by being able to log into the user. Now you might say, well, I don't have their password. How can I look at their bash history? It's in their user folder. It's protected, right? How do we get around that? Root. You log in as root user, the sudo command, and you can get in as any other user you want to, and you can navigate the file system. So you'd be able to see that history file as well. Okay, so a couple of ways. The very first one, this is really one of my favorites. Discal. If you've worked with directory services in the past and had any issues binding systems in or joining them to a domain, Discal is Directory Services Command Line. This gives you full access to the entire LDAP structure. And whether you're using Active Directory or Open Directory, they're both built off of X500, which is the Open LDAP standard, right? The one that was created by Novell. Isn't that ironic that both Microsoft and Apple are using Novell's implementation of it? For those that are using older versions, well, actually it still even exists now. Workgroup Manager allows us to change the shell. Okay, so it is still out there. Hasn't been quite deprecated yet. Server app, server preferences, going into users and groups. The terminal app allows us to change the shell, right? The CHSH means change shell. And it's a permanent change. It's not a temporary change, but you can always go back and change it back again. Now, one of the best things that we can do as administrators is to make our lives a little bit easier. Automation, anything that's repetitive that you do on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis, try automating it, right? There's very little chance of human error dealing with a script. Once the script is working, it's going and it's working for you. And I'm going to talk about ways to automate, and we'll pull apart a script, take a look at how it's actually built. But so even though this class is an intro into working in the command line, shell scripting is the next step forward, right? Learning how to write stuff that's going to make your job easier. Now, I don't know about you guys, I'm pretty lazy, so anything I can automate, I do automate. Makes my life a little bit easier too. When you take a look at a command, it's easy to break down into 4 different sections. So the very first part right here is the actual BSD command, the UNIX command. The second part are all the options. You'll hear some people say flags. I use that all the time as well. But those are all the options. This third part are the arguments. What does this command apply to? Typically, it's going to be a file or folder. Right? Last part is if we needed it. Redirection of output or any other commands that we're going to tag along with it. So we can do multiple commands and string them together to have it produce a process for us. You can always go to the man pages for any command that you see. So it's the BSD command. You type in just man, space, and the command name. Right? And you're going to find that there's a lot of documentation on commands. They are not all current, but they're fairly up to date. And I've had people ask about how do I print out all of this, right? Can I do a man on the man pages? Yeah, you can, but that's, last count, I think it was 1,050 pages or so. You're much better buying one of the books from O'Reilly or Peach Pit Press on Unix, like the pocket guides, that make it all very simple for you. So it's just something that small book that you can keep on your bookshelf or carry around with you and reference it for simple examples on how to use the command line. Okay, as I said, just about every command has a man page. Some of them are better than others. So as you get a little bit deeper, a little bit more advanced, and you say, well, you know what, I administer servers as well. From the server side, those commands aren't as well delineated in the man pages, right? Like the server admin command. That's one of the great commands out there, but it doesn't have a whole lot of documentation until you go to third-party resources. Basically, people that have just been tinkering with it until they find exactly how it works, and then they document it as well. But being able to pull up a man page certainly makes your job easier, especially when you're on the spot. You can use wildcards in your scripts or any command line commands. Now, wildcards, if you've done any level of programming at all, you're probably already used to the wildcard figure. So, like a question mark. Question mark means any character can go in this position, right? And it's position by position. Whereas the asterisk, it says anything after what I've already typed, take any input. So if we take a file, if I'm asking it to find any file that starts with Russell, and I want to find in particular anything that says russell.key or .pdf, I can do Russell asterisk, and it's going to find anything that starts Russell period. It doesn't matter what exists after it, it will find those files for me. Right, so some good commands that we can make a little bit more powerful just by putting in some of our wildcards here. I mentioned this a minute ago. The root user interface is the most powerful area that you can get into in the operating system. Any of you that come from the OS 9 days, we were running as root users, right? It gave us the same power under OS 9 as the root user does now. Root is disabled by default on OS 10 client and OS 10 server, and that's a good thing in my opinion. And I'll give you a real quick story as to why I think that's such a good thing in just a minute. But with root being disabled by default, you can turn it on inside a directory utility so it's on the system permanently. And all I'm doing at this point by turning on inside of Directory Utility is giving access to the GUI, so I can log in as the root user from the login screen. I prefer to always leave it off because whenever I need root access, I'm just going to issue the sudo command from the command line, and I've got the root access temporarily. Okay, so I told you I was going to get to this story. I went into a very large biotech firm where they're having problems with the systems. And they said, we want to figure out why we're having the problems and if you guys can fix it. I'm not sure that we can fix it, but let's take a look. So I walk up to the first gentleman, and I see him inside of the System Library Fonts folder, and he was throwing away a font. No dialog came up. I'm like, uh-oh. Big red flag, because to change anything in the system folder, you have to put in your admin credentials. What's your name? Tim. So Tim, I saw you just throwing away fonts. How are you doing that inside of your system, in the system library folder? I'm logged in as root. Okay. Do you, why did you do that? Well, the admin said it's just easier if we self-service our machines. So everybody here in our department just stays logged in as root all the time.
Yes.
32 Mac users that were all logged in as root. Is there anybody here that can fix the problem on 32 systems? How do we reverse engineer that? How do we know exactly what he did, or he did, or he did? So you guys have heard the phrase nuke and pave. I don't take credit for creating that. Basically, that's one of those scenarios where we have to nuke and pave. We don't know what each person has done to their system different than the others. But now we know why they have so much instability with their systems. They shouldn't be in there. So I leave root access off by default on servers and on client machines all the time. I do turn SSH on servers, and that's it. I do not turn it on client machines. And for one simple reason, I don't want somebody tinkering. I don't want somebody getting into it and even on the client side and figuring out what the passwords are. The servers I have locked down so that I know I can only hit them from certain IP addresses, or when I VPN in, I can hit them from that as well. So I always have a backdoor into the servers. Now, you will always have a change in the prompt. Oh, I don't even have it up here. It's going to be a hash mark, right? The pound sign. So as soon as you're in as root user, you've got your cursor is changed to the pound sign. But as I said, be very careful. I have gotten into a very bad habit. Every time I launch a shell, I type in sudo-s. What's the problem with that? I'm leaving it as root user. If I walk away just to go to the restroom, I forget to close out sometimes. And so you're better, but then as I said, I'm lazy. So if I do sudo-s, I don't have to keep typing in sudo. Also keep in mind, I'm not sure if it's considered a flaw with the operating system. When you type in sudo and your command name, it's going to ask you for the password. It remembers that password for 5 minutes, no matter what you do. Is that a little scary? No matter what you do short of restarting the system. So if I do an exit to get out of the shell, if I do a quitting of terminal app and I launch it back up again within 5 minutes, if I type in sudo, it lets me right in with no password. Okay, so just be careful timing-wise on how that works. Now, it's not 5 minutes from the time you quit your sudo session. It's 5 minutes from the second that you put your password in. So that can still be considered a security compromise. Best practice always to exit out and quit out. Exit out of the shell and then quit out of the terminal app as well. Now, there's a lot of different commands that we can use to move files around, play with files. Couple of them you're probably familiar with. And most people, it's interesting, in our certification classes, we get about half the admins coming from the Windows side. And some of the Windows admins are coming in like, I have to be in this class. I hate it. I have to be in this class. And usually by the end, when they see it's not so different, it's just a different name for the tool and different way of working, they're pretty open to it. But if they've had any experience with DOS, they pick up the command line pretty quick. Right? So command line has been around for 40 plus years. Actually, 47 years I think it is now. Same amount of time as I've been around. That's kind of scary, huh? So we have the touch command. The touch command will, if there is no file with that same name, will create a file with that name, just creating an empty text file, a true text file. Or if I touch a file that already exists, it's going to change the modification date. Now think about this for a minute. If I'm changing the modification date of a file just by hitting this command, what implication could that have on you guys as administrators? And I'm thinking more towards when my backup programs are running. Right? My backups are doing an incremental. What does that mean those files that I touched are going to do? It sees them as changed. It's going to back them up all over again. And there may be a principal or an administrator that says, I don't care if you've already backed these up, I want them backed up every single night. Great. I can hit the touch command and I know that they're going to be backed up again tonight, even if nothing has changed in the last day or two. Okay. How many have seen the DS store file? It's a hidden file. Nobody's played it? Okay. So there's programs out there that clean up these DS store files, right? They go through and you see it chugging away and deleting 100,000 DS store files. Wow, it just cleaned up my system. What's going to happen next?
You recreate it.
They will all be recreated immediately. So is there a problem with its directory structure? Is there a problem with these DS files in general? No. But when you go and open a window and it just spins and spins and spins and isn't opening the window or displaying it for a long time, that DS store file could be corrupt, and just simply deleting it out of there might fix that corruption. I've had that happen a lot of times. So that's a good troubleshooting tip right there. You also have .trash. There is a trash folder at every level of the operating system. Even though we see it in the dock down in one central location within the OS, there's a trash folder that we can get to from, say, the users folder. A lot of the commands, when you take a look at the name, gives away what it's doing, right? MV is move. CP is copy. RM is remove. So some of the commands sound very, you know what, that's not even true anymore. Unix command does recognize the resource fork at this point. So a lot of the commands are give away exactly what they're going to do. Others are very well masked, and it's hard to figure out without playing or pulling a man page on it. Now, as you're navigating the operating system, a couple of commands that can help us out there. The push command, it remembers where you were so you can jump back to it real quick. Right? Especially if you're scripting or use a common directory all the time and you keep having to change around. So use the push command to remember where we were currently at. We use the popd to pop back to that current directory. Okay, a lot of people, when they first see pwd, oh, that's password. No, that's present working directory or print working directory, depending on what version of Unix you come from. So it just shows you where you're at. There's a lot of times where I get lost in the command line. I'm like, wait, where am I at again? Okay, make directory, copy directory, remove directory. Now, we can use wildcards in all of these areas. We're also going to use different operands. One of the best operands that I use quite often, actually there's two, and it depends on what command you use this with. If I use the flag of -R or -R or -F, how many of you know what the -R command is? Recursion. Yeah, it means do it to this folder and then everything within it. Okay, so if I'm removing a directory, rm space -R, everything within that directory is going to be gone. The -F command, I won't get much into case sensitivity, but sometimes you'll have a different result using capital R than you'll have with lower r. But -F typically means force this. Right? Have you ever gone through and told it to delete some files and it keeps saying, are you sure you want to delete this file, or this file is locked, and then you say delete and next, and you just keep having to do it, keep having to do it? The -F just answers, yes, do it to all of this, especially if you issue it with the sudo command.
Back one second.
Yeah.
Push command. I'm not seeing that in man pages or anything.
Okay, let me take a look at that at the end. Now, Being a Unix-based operating system, our default privileges are going to be based on POSIX. POSIX don't give us as much flexibility as access control lists. Access control lists were created by Microsoft, and Apple started using them in 10.4.x, and it was a welcome addition for us. So when you take a look at POSIX from both the GUI and the command line side, I know this is a little bit hard to see because it's blurry, but you basically have user, group, and other. From POSIX terminology, it's called user, group, and other. From Apple terminology, it's owner, group, and everyone. Means the exact same thing. Okay? And we have only 3 options: read, write, and execute. So I see my 3 options over here. When you take a look at it, the first letter here tells me whether it is a directory with a D, a file with a dash, or an L for a symbolic link. So before I move on, who can tell me what a symbolic link is? Reference to a different location. So I heard the word alias. It works very much like an alias, except an alias is movable. A symbolic link is not. It's hard-coded to a place in the operating system, typically created by the operating system itself, but you can do it from the command line as well. Then you have 3 groups of 3. So that's the owner, group, and everyone else. So over here on the get info side, how come I don't have execute? I have read, I have write, I have read and write, and I have no access. How come I don't have execute? Yeah, it's implied. If I double click on a folder and don't have execute rights, it's not going to open up. So it's an implied command or an implied privilege. Now, when you start working from the command line, it's a very standardized interface, very straightforward when you know how it works. So at our normal command prompt, this actually tells us who the user is that's logged in. That's their short name. And because it has a $sign there, that means they are logged in as a standard user or an admin, but not root. They don't have root access at this point. We list our command. Right? This command is simply listing everything that's in the directory in long format with attributes shown. Our command results show back up down here, and then it drops us right back to a command line prompt saying, okay, I'm done. What do you want to do next? Right? So it's pretty straightforward. This part of it doesn't change. The power comes in knowing the commands that are available to you and how to utilize them. Now, there's a number of different things that Apple has given us, tools in our belt, that make our job a little bit easier for navigating the command line. And this one I'm going to show you real quick because I use it quite often. The top 2, tab completion and drag folder to terminal completion. It makes my job a whole lot easier. So, you probably want to see it on your screen, huh? There we go. Now, you guys all have good eyes, so I don't need to make this any bigger, do I?
Yes, you do.
So if I want to change directories, let's start at the root level. CD/ takes us to the root level, and I do a listing in long format, right? So if I want to change over to something, say, library application support, CD library, I type in the first letter or 2 letters, hit tab, it's automatically going to complete it for me. This is a great time-saving feature. Now I type in application support. Why is there a backslash in there? Yeah, backing out the space. Unix doesn't like the spaces, so it's going to back it out for me, which is kind of nice that it throws it in there. Now, one other way, and you can see where this would work great on a long path name. It's a lot less typing. One other way, I'm going to just grab a folder. So I am on my other system right now. I'm going to grab something from my users library real quick. So if I want to quickly jump over to user library application support, I can start off by typing in the command, and then I drag and drop from my library application support. There it is. And it'll auto-complete it for me. Right? So 2 methods that make our job a whole lot easier. And there's a couple other things in here. I don't use them as much, but I still use anything I can to make my job a little bit easier. I will use it. So jumping around on a line, especially on a long line, you got the control commands in there. Escape F moves forward one word, Escape B backward one word, Control C stops where you're at, in most cases. Sometimes you have to hit just a Q. Clear clears the screen, give you a nice clean break there. Now, be very careful because it's easy to confuse characters from the command line when you see them printed. And it really depends what font is in the book. So a lot of times you'll see it a monospace font like Courier, or I forget what the other one is, but Courier's a common font, so that it's easy to see the difference between a 0 and an O, right? An L and a 1, or a dash and a tilde. By the way, what does tilde mean? Yeah, the current user's home folder. So that's a quick way. If I do cd / tilde, that's going to jump me to my home folder. So a quick way to take a look at it. Case sensitivity is not as important from the command line's perspective, right? So on the commands itself, it's important, but the path names, it'll still figure it out. So it's a case-insensitive operating system right now. But exact path names are very important. Spaces in file names and paths can have unexpected results. And if you've ever had a user that saved a file with a period at the start of it and then calls you up for tech support, they can't find that file, they just saved it to the server. Where is it? Right? The period made it hidden. Other things they can do to really wreak havoc for you guys, they put a slash in the name. Okay? Because what can that do? Spinning out of control. Some of your most powerful tools are only done from the root level. Meaning, if I want to change permissions on a file or a folder, or change ownership on a file or folder, those have to be preceded by the sudo command. Now, most of us have probably had users call up saying, I just saved a whole bunch of files to the server, now I have read-only access to it. Right? So here's a quick way that you can go and modify that by using the change modification command or the chown command. Now, the chown command is basically changing ownership. And you can change ownership with the user level or the group level. The chmod command changes our read, write, and execute permissions. Now, if you look at it, you can do this numerically too, and as you get more advanced, it tends to work out in your favor. But until you've gotten to that point, you're using the chmod command with one section from the first, one from the second, and one from the third, generally. So in other words, I've got a file that has read-only access, and I want to give myself write access to that file, right? And I'm part of the group. So I would do chmod g plus w. Give the group write permissions, or take away write permissions, minus w. And then the file name and the path. And remember, if it's a folder, you probably want to change everything inside of it as well. So what's the flag we use to do it inside of that folder as well? -r, right? We want to turn on recursion. There's a number of text editors that you can use. TextEdit is not my favorite. It creates RTF files by default, so you've got to go to the preferences and change it so it doesn't do RTF, because command line does not like those. You can download Text Wrangler, which is free. It's a great tool. It does everything for proper Unix convention. If you like it from the command line better, you've got 3 different built-in command line editors. You've got VI, and those that have been with Unix for a long time, oh yeah, VI is the best. Right? It's what you learned, that's usually the best. I usually tell people, Nano or Pico, they map to the same product now. I can't remember, I think it was Pico that was deprecated. One of them was, but it still maps to the same place. Is usually a good start for people just getting into this, because it gives you hints at the top and the bottom of the screen of what's going on. Hey, hit Control W if you want to do this. And Emacs, less popular one, but it's pretty good as well. So any one of those, VI is the most challenging, but you can navigate through it the fastest. So as you become a Unix expert, you probably will be going with VI. Now, we already know what the user sees on the system is going to be the actual applications that are running. They're going to get a top-level overview, not as much information. What we're looking for as administrators is what's going on with all the daemons and processes. Okay? And we have several commands that can help us with this. In fact, we have a GUI as well. Activity Monitor gives us a great insight to what's going on the system. Now, of course, most of you know that when you launch Activity Monitor, it shows you your processes only by default. So you have to change it to all processes, and it'll remember that from here on out. Using the top command gives you the same information that you see from Activity Monitor. Very fast, very efficient. The kill command can kill a single process or daemon, or you can do a kill all to take a whole group of processes out, meaning the main daemon and any threads that are running underneath it. Okay. Some of the processes you have to use the sudo command. So if you see that the owner of it is system or root, or a different user, in fact, because I've had to do that as well, you may have to issue the sudo command. Okay? So top, kill, kill all are the main command line tools for managing our processes and daemons. Now, we have one more listed up there. It's called process status. The PS command shows us all running instances of a process and their current state. Where can that benefit you? Why do we need to know that as opposed to it's just running or not? What's that?
Anything that's like zombied or
Hung job, right? You see 1,000 instances of it. Why do we have 1,000 instances? Right? Something may have spun out of control. Okay? I don't know. How many of you are administering 10.9 servers? Okay. Have you ever seen when you have Time Machine server turned on? After a period of time, you'll have a user logged in with over 2,000 instances of logins over AFP. Why? It's because they kept closing their laptop, and every time they reopen it, it initiates another login. Close, open, close, open, close, open, and they get a couple thousand going there, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, something's wrong with the server. The only way, because even stopping the process doesn't change their logins. Doesn't change that number down. It's shutting down AFP and restarting. Now remember, Mavericks wants to go to SMB2, but there are only two things that are still running AFP. That's Time Machine server. You can't change that. We tried. It breaks it. And login, changing your password. You cannot change your password over SMB. It has to be over AFP. All right, so we still do have to have it running. And plus, for any legacy support, anybody on 10.8 and lower still will need AFP generally. How many of you are using ARD? That is a great tool. I'm glad to see so many people using it. So how do I deal with the client machine when I don't turn on SSH or remote login? I do it over ARD, and I pop the command out. And the most fun command, especially in a lab late at night, there's only one or two people in there, you do the say command with the volume all the way up and have it say something to them. I know. I think of geeky things like that all the time. But you have full access to even put it in as the root user, right, to issue the sudo command. So you have a high level of functionality from within ARD. I had alluded to the fact of automation a little bit earlier. What is the whole purpose of this? To make our jobs easier. And when you think about the things that you do on a daily basis, there's probably one or more items that could be automated. Right? So right now, maybe it takes you 10 minutes to do it. If you automate it and say, fire this off at 8 o'clock every morning, does it for you, and it just saved you those 10 minutes. So think about things in your normal workflow, in your normal life, that you may want to automate, and start working on automating things. Right? We want to eliminate the repetitive tasks. We want to get some help with time-consuming tasks, quality by avoiding mistakes. If it's automated, computer's not going to enter bad information. Right? Bad information comes from us. Ensure task execution and become more efficient. That's the whole nature of it. And a lot of the sessions that you've seen this week deal with scripting. And you'll see a higher and higher emphasis as the technology evolves on scripting and automation. And you can use any of the built-in scripting languages. You can add your own scripting languages. They can all be tied together. Right? The most common ones out there that are built into OS, Perl, Python, PHP, TCL, Ruby on Rails, and the different shell environments that you can jump into. And you even have Apple's own technologies. You have Automator. I have a lot of students that start off building their scripts by doing it in Automator and then looking at what it's doing and learning from what it said there. You can go onto Apple's website, apple.com/automator, and download free scripts. And as you're looking through the list, you might see scripts like, ooh, that's cool, I really would like to automate that. It's going to give you ideas of what to automate. Okay, so you can tie Apple script together, you can tie Automator together, and you can tie shell scripts together. So if you don't know how to do it in Bash, then we build it in Automator. We tell Bash to fire it off and do all the extra stuff at the same time, right? So tying multiple different languages together and multiple different tools together works out great. Now what you'll find is anytime you create your own script, just like in programming, it takes more time to test it fully and make sure that it's working the way you thought. And over time, you might find different ways to make it even more efficient. So you may go back and you might edit it again and make it a lot more efficient and have it run faster. Typically, Automator scripts, on average, are going to run a little bit slower than a shell script. That's on average. It's usually because we put in so many extra steps. Okay? And then Apple script was really designed to be a human-like programming language that people that didn't want to do actual programming could pick it up and learn it. Right? And it is a pretty easy scripting language. Our next task is to automate them. Set it up on a repetitive cycle. What are the commands that we have to do this? Cron, periodic, and I'm going to talk about all these because some of them are actually deprecated, and it really depends what version of the operating system that you're using. We can also set them as startup items. Anytime a user logs in, it'll start it up, or as a launchd item, right? Launchd is one of those things that we're going to talk about in just a minute here that has a lot of control over our operating system and generally makes our lives a whole lot easier as well. Okay, so for scheduling, we can set it to run always, run on demand, run at a specific time, or run periodically. Like you guys have maintenance scripts that are running on your system at different times of the mornings or different times of the month. Now, cron is really considered deprecated. You can still use it if you want to, but the functionality has been replaced quite a bit by launchd. And launchd is the super server, the super process that we're going to talk about more. So it executes periodic scheduled commands. It only starts when it sees files in those two locations. You see that we have some differences between the versions of OS that we're running here, and you're going to notice that in nearly every version. It gets moved to different places depending on how emphasized it is in that particular version. So the at command has been basically moved off of the system. You can still turn it back on if you wanted to, but as of 10.5.2, it was pulled out of there. And you'll see why in a minute, because launchd can handle so much of this. Now, a lot of the common scripts that are running on your system, they're running on a regular basis no matter how you look at it. And these are the maintenance scripts. So for those users that are shutting down their systems every single night, these scripts aren't running for them. Right? When the system is asleep and when it's in deep sleep, these scripts aren't running for them. But you have daily scripts that are running at 3:15 in the morning. You have weekly, every Saturday at 3:15, and you have monthly, the first day of the month at 5:30. We can coincide scripts to run with those as well, right? So examples of why we would set up a script, you might set up a script that reimages the system every week, every Saturday. So it goes through in the lab Monday through Friday, and then no matter what the user has put on there, it's going to reimage it for us. So that's one example of how we could automate it pretty easily. Now to add your own scripts into the periodic side, we only have to do a couple of different items here. You have to put it in the right location, depending on how frequently you want it to run. You have to give it a numeric value, so it shows what order of precedence that it takes. And you have to change the ownership and the privileges. You have to make it executable by root, because now it's got to be a root process. So these items are pretty easy to put in place. Now, startup items, they've been deprecated or considered deprecated for quite some time, but we still see them in the operating system. Startup items, in most cases, can easily be rewritten as a launchd and become quite a bit more efficient. Okay, the number one example I know of is an accounting program, Account Edge on the Mac side. that uses startup items, and it's so flaky. If you just change it from a startup item to a launchd, it's no longer a flaky process. Okay, so we still see them in there. They just tend to be very inefficient compared to a launchd item. Now, launchd, as I've brought up several times, it's designed to be the super server. It came out in 10.4, and it's been improved upon each level, each iteration of the operating system. Now, launchd sounds a little bit daunting, and I went and looked on developer.apple.com for some documentation on launchd that can give my students a real easy kickstarter to how it works. And the whole PDF is only 28 pages long, and it teaches you all about how to program a launchd item. It's pretty easy reading. It's not like the normal dry Unix reading that you would see. So if you want to learn more about launchd, 28-page PDF on developer.apple.com. And just do a Google search for launchd documentation. Okay, so if you take a look why I called it the super server, it is designed to replace all of those various processes. Okay, most of those processes went away in 10.4. Some of them started going away in 10.5 and 10.6. Pretty much all of these were gone by the time 10.7 came around. So replaces a lot of things. Yes, we're putting a lot of emphasis on it. So what happens when launchd fails? Launchd is designed to constantly monitor what's going on with the operating system, and if it did totally fail, your system would restart because it's going to try to respawn itself. But it's extremely stable, right? We don't have problems really with launchd unless you program your own launchd that had some problem in the coding. That's the only time where you might see it become unstable. So it's fully asynchronous bootstrap. It's got fault isolation and error recovery. It's designed to sniff out problems that are happening. Okay, I had a server just last night that was spinning a process out of control, took it up to 7.9 terabytes for our plist file. I was probably not too far away from the server crashing if it went any further, but I caught it in time. And launchd was monitoring it. I didn't actually catch it before launchd did, and it shut down the process, created a new plist file, and just left it as it put a .bad at the end of it. I'm like, cool, it's watching out for me. I like that. It is pay-as-you-go, so it only starts the processes on demand. If it doesn't need the process, it's not going to start it for you. Has a lot of security because it's got privileges separation. So when you're talking to launchd from the command line prompt, we're using launchctl. Launchctl is the interface into it to fire off, list, load, unload, debug, start or stop a job. And it's as simple as that. And that's why it's such a short PDF for the reading. And by the way, there will be, I know I go through this fast, which is why I make my slides available to you guys, but there's a lot to cover. And you obviously can't learn everything there is about the command line in a 1.25 hour session. So there's going to be a Q&A at the end, and there will also be these slides available to anybody that wants them sent to them or tagged into the Dropbox. There is one launchd for each user. So if that launchd goes bad, that's on a user basis. That is not the same one that's running the system. So the launchd only fires off for each user as that user is logged in. And as soon as the user logs back out, that instance gets shut down. So it's not using resources. So probably all of you have had some experience with fast user switching and know that when you've got 2 users logged into the system, it takes up a lot of resources, right? It's almost doubling the resources. Not quite, almost doubling the resources. So when you've got fast user switching on, which we always recommend to have shut off, there's some minor instances where we say, yeah, fast user switching is good, but generally keep it shut off. So we've got launchds that are monitoring each environment. And even more troublesome is when we've got a user in, say, Photoshop. Photoshop 6, that's a good one to use. If the second user tries to get into Photoshop 6, they're going to get resource busy. Photoshop 6 was not a program that was written to true Unix standards that could allow the full multitasking. So a lot of resource busy would come up. So you got a user that's scanning in this huge item and you know it's going to take an hour. Or they're doing a Gaussian blur on an image. That means that for the most part, Photoshop is unusable for others. Now you can get in and do other things in Photoshop, but if it crosses over into the same type of command, it's going to give you a resource busy, right? And then you're shut down from that particular product or process. All right, some great resources here that you guys can utilize from the command line to take a look at the system. CPU walk.d, measure which CPUs a process runs on. Have you ever seen an activity monitor or top where a process is taking up 130%? How is that possible? How can it ever be over 100%?
CPUs.
Yeah, multiple cores, right? So if you've got a 4-core system, it can go up to 400% before it's taxing the unit. Now, all of you have probably seen on a laptop, when you're above 100% on any one task, those fans start firing off, right? And the more it goes up, the faster those fans start firing. So we can take a look at a particular process and see what CPUs is it using. If it's using all of one CPU and then trailing over into a different one, it's not very well written, and it's definitely not written to 64-bit coding. But if I see that it's doing 28% on each of the 4 cores, I know it's properly written to Unix standards, current Unix standards. Okay, top-u. We already talked about the top command, but it lists processes by CPU usage. This is typically the most common scenario when I'm going into Activity Monitor or top. I want to see what's taking up the most of my CPU, 172.5% in this case. To take a look at what's going on with memory. First off, what is VM? What does that stand for? Okay. What's faster, virtual memory or RAM? RAM, quite a bit. Virtual memory is basically taking hard drive swap space and utilizing it as RAM. So if you've got systems where you bought them with only 4 gigs of RAM and now you're up to Mavericks, and you know Mavericks likes a lot more RAM than Mountain Lion did, right? Even though the RAM requirements are still 2 gigs, how many of you run Mavericks on a 2 gig machine? And how many are happy about that performance, right? It's amazing just by going from 2 to 4 gigs, how much more performance you get out of it. So, and that's because everything's being swapped to virtual memory when you have too little RAM. I've had clients that don't want to spend the money on RAM, and they're going to be using it for Photoshop, right? And so they've got an 8 gig system, and they're trying to open up a 2 gig Photoshop image on it. Well, Photoshop wants 3 to 5 times that amount in RAM. So it immediately starts going to virtual memory, which means the whole system is going to slow down quite a bit. Any change you make, it's going to re-render it. Okay, so VM_stat shows us exactly what's going on with virtual memory, right? The numbers when they're lower, that's better. Less going into virtual memory. There will always be something going into virtual memory no matter how much RAM you have. That's just the nature of Unix. It's always keeping a pipeline open to virtual memory. And I'm seeing one command I forgot to put on here. So to take a look at the disk, the df command, disk free. The du command I have missing from here. And the du command, I love that command because it's so fast, so efficient. It shows, if I do a du-h, human readable format, with sudo turned on, I can see the user folder and how many files or how much data is in every single folder in there. And it's coming back pretty quick. In fact, that's the command that I used to find that 7.2 terabyte file, plist file that I ran across. But very fast, very efficient. The IO stat reports IO statistics. We're going to talk about lists of open files. When you launch Photoshop, have you ever wanted to know what other processes fire off with it? LSOF will show you as you launch it. It'll say spawn, spawn, spawn. It'll show you what's spawning off on the system. FS_usage is file system usage. It tells you what system calls are being made. Now, as you start thinking about this is great for troubleshooting, right? Would you just do this just to be fun? Maybe, right? Kind of in a geeky way, but it helps quite a bit with troubleshooting, especially if you've got an app that keeps crashing or beach balling your system. Most of these commands can help you narrow down the variables. Isn't that the whole issue with troubleshooting, you're trying to narrow down the variables to get it down to just one. Now, of course, sometimes it's a lot easier to do the nuke and pave method where we just blast and say, fixed it. Oh, what was the problem? I don't know, but it's fixed. You really want me to go figure it out? I probably could, but. Okay, on the networking side, popular command out there, netstat and TCP dump. If you want to do any packet sniffing, these commands will let you do all the packet sniffing that you want. Yes, sir?
Real quick question. On a lot of the entities, you've got paren and then numbers next to them. 1 and 8 seems to be bouncing.
Great question. Yeah, and I didn't explain that. That's the section of the man pages it falls under. And in previous versions, nobody seems to care what section it falls under anymore, but it used to be pretty important. Now it's like, whatever. So yeah, you don't really need to have the parentheses items there. It just shows the section of the man pages. Now, if you're going to do any true packet sniffing, there's some good programs out there. I use Wireshark. Have any of you used that before? Okay, that's a fun one. Plug it in at an enterprise level company and don't tell the admins what you're doing and let it run. They come down on you pretty fast. But remember that anytime you're doing packet sniffing, what's the drawback to doing it on a switched network?
You don't see your packets.
Yes, you only see your packets. Okay, so if you're on a switched network, and most of us are, how do you get around that?
Program a switch port, you go into promiscuous mode to listen.
Yes. So you can program a port on a managed switch, or some of them have that console port. You can tag into the console port and do it from there as well. Right? Now, if you're monitoring traffic on Wi-Fi, what do you need to do? Nothing. Wi-Fi is the equivalent of a hub. So you don't have to do anything. You're seeing everybody's traffic going through there. It is not switched information. Okay, I did mention the virtues of SSH. SSH allows us to go into secure shell. It's a command line prompt from a different machine. And from a different machine, I'm opening it up as if I'm right there in front of it. I have all the full access to it that I want to. You have some fun with it, someone and SSH into their machine and do a sudo space open space /applications asterisk. Right? See how long it locks our system up for as it opens every application in there. So some of the things that fall under the category of SSH are SCP, which is secure copy. It's going to do it inside of the encrypted tunnel and add extra encryption on it. Or SFTP. A lot of people think that SFTP is an extension of the FTP protocol, and they're entirely separate. So when you set up an FTP server, even on Apple's FTP offering, it is just FTP. Putting an SSL certificate on top of it does not make it SFTP. It's a different protocol. There's a lot of products that do SFTP and FTP and WebDAV all in one. So SSH uses key pairs, just like an SSL certificate would, to identify both hosts and create an encrypted session between them. SSH tends to be very fast, very efficient, and unlike you've heard over most things, putting encryption in place here isn't a huge drawback. The overhead tends to be about 6 to 8%, whereas on a VPN tunnel, you can have upwards of 40% overhead on that tunnel. Okay, but they're adding a lot more things into place. Some of your built-in command line tools, we've talked about a few of these. There's my DU command that I like so much. But this gives you a pretty good listing of ones that we haven't gone in deeper. And again, this is one that when you download the slides, you can, or take a picture of it, that'll work too. But can you get enough detail when you zoom in on it? So good listing of commands that we don't get into. You know, there's thousands of commands. And for us to talk about all of them, you guys would be asleep pretty quick. I know I would. How many have read the book on DNS and bind? Any administrators here? How many times did you fall asleep while reading it?
It's a very interesting read.
It's 800 pages of riveting material, right? What's that?
I'm waiting for the movie.
I was looking for the Cliffs Notes, but I couldn't find them anywhere. Yeah, Unix reading tends to be a little bit dry unless you're looking for something particular out of it. You can only take it a piece at a time here. All right, so to assess service and process utilization, we talked about Activity Monitor, process status, and top. Those are our primary tools for looking at process utilization. To take a look at hardware utilization, in summary, Activity Monitor does show us some. VM stat is our virtual memory side of things. System control. Okay, system control gives us a lot of information and a lot of things that we can possibly change. So system setup falls under that same category. Again, these are commands that you can write down and start to pull man pages on and take a look at it. And if you've ever done a system profiler, it's system information now in 10.9. But when you pull one of those system reports, they're pretty long. When you pull them from the command line, they're even longer. Right? It's a lot of information that it's pulling there, but it's doing the same command, just doesn't look as pretty. Okay, the distUtil command. This is a way we can go in and change encryption, blow out encryption. It's the same thing as running disk utility, but you have more features from the command line than you do from the GUI side, right? And especially in regards to encryption or things like not as effectively file vault, but turning on single encryption of extended drives. Make sure when you're done with the command line, especially if you went in with root user privileges, that you log out or exit the shell. And remember, 5 minutes after you typed in your password, it's still going to remember it for you, which is nice for me because I create so many different windows. I just keep opening them up and type in sudo-s. Okay, the reboot command will flush everything out of there, so it does not remember your password. Now, of course, it's rebooting your system. It's doing it gracefully, though. The halt command does not do it gracefully. What do I mean by gracefully versus not gracefully?
It'll close what it can close.
Yeah.
In the process.
Yeah. So it shuts it down properly, all the header files, and tucks it away nice and pretty. The halt command just says, bye-bye, gone. So you might have some corruption when you bring your system back up. It might take a little bit of time to bring it up after that. Now, there's a number of tools, and in fact, most of the GUI applications that are out there for backups rely on some of these tools here. rsync is probably one of the most popular, right? Carbon Copy Cloner uses rsync. It's just a GUI way into it because so many people are confused how rsync works. And Carbon Copy Cloner is a great way to get in and utilize it from the GUI side if you don't want to spend the time to learn rsync. I know SuperDuper and quite a few others use rsync as well. The ditto command, complete duplicate, system to system, including resource forks. You've got the ASR command. Now, ASR is for Apple Software Restore. If you're doing deployment of images or deployment of packages, it's using ASR. And ASR is very fast, very powerful. Okay, there is a server app command. Right, so you can dig a little bit deeper. And I don't have it listed here, but the server admin command, that's one that I use all the time when administering servers. Have you ever, for those of you that administer a Mac server, have you ever had a time when DNS wasn't working and you look in the GUI and it shows that it's on, and then you go to the command line and it says stopped? I've seen that happen before. And all I do is I force a stop to make sure all processes are shut down and then tell it to start again. And sometimes the GUI will show that it shut down and turned back on. Sometimes it'll just leave itself back on. So faster, more efficient from the command line than you're going to see from the GUI side of things. Okay, a lot of third-party solutions for backups, but most of them are going to be using some of the common tools that are available in Unix. They just do it in a much nicer, cleaner way. Right? They make their money by making your job easier because they say, look, all you have to do is click here, and click here. It's the GUI interface. Now, if you take a look at rsync as the command actually works, it keeps backup data in sync with the original. It is a one-way sync. It's not bidirectional synchronization. It only copies files or blocks of files that have changed. It can copy extended attributes, which is important, including the resource forks. Right? Who knows what the resource forks are?
Metadata plus data.
Yeah, it's the way that Apple used to deal with the old metadata. Right? Now it's just considered metadata, but that really is what a resource fork is. Okay, it can back up via network using SSH, which is a very fast, very efficient method. And I gave an example here of the rsync command, but you've got quite a few operands that you're going to be running with it, because just by itself, it's not going to do a whole lot for you. Ditto command is a complete copy of a specified folder or volume, and it grabs absolutely everything. right? And it does a really good job. It takes longer, right? Because it even grabs the open space and tries to compress it as it's going along. And then ASR. ASR, if you're doing it from the command line, probably means that you're doing multicast. If you're just doing unicast, which comes standard with all of Apple's tools, you're probably going to do it from the GUI, and that's fine. It operates very fast, very efficient. Multicast is changeable via the command line here. Okay, and I throw a couple other really good Unix tools in play here that some people use. Secure copy, right, to add extra encryption on top of it. HDUtil. The zip command. The zip command does have capabilities of encryption, but it's not supported by the Apple GUI. So if you do it from the command line, just keep in mind that your users on the other end are going to have to decrypt it from the command line as well. They can't double-click on that file. Okay, good resources out there. Any of the books from O'Reilly, including their pocket guides, they're usually top-notch. I list one site, osxfaq.com, has a knowledge center. It's about a 40-hour tutorial on Unix, on the basics of Unix. They also have an advanced site. I just recommend that 40 hours you do straight. Don't go to sleep. And I didn't even list Apple's site there. Developer.apple.com. You guys can all get a free account, and they've got an incredible volume of information, training information, videos, PDFs that you can go through to learn the command line. Okay, most powerful thing here. We already saw what POSIX permissions looked like. It was user, group, and other, read, write, and execute. ACLs, which I mentioned at the very start of the session, ACLs allow us to go in and put some really granular permissions onto our files and folders. So they really allow us to do our job better. They allow us to set up nested groups, so groups within groups. We didn't have that for a while. We had it under Apple Share IP for OS 9, but we didn't have it under OS 10 until 10.4 came out and allowed us to do it once again. So your main commands here, file system, access control list, control. So fsaclctl is one of them. chmod with the -a and the -e commands. You also have the listing command, -le, shows your extended attributes in place. So most of the tools have been supplemented with ACL list. So anytime you hear that acronym ACL, it stands for Access Control List, right? That's the Microsoft implementation here. And you can see that with doing a regular listing, you don't get nearly this much data off of it. But it shows you exactly what all the attributes are, the security level that you have in place, anything that was given with access control lists. Okay, and then the last section here deals with binding. A lot of our clients have had issues with binding. They don't like to do it from the GUI interface. I'm not a fan of doing it from the GUI interface because I have intermittent results with it. Whereas I can just throw this script into Apple Remote Desktop, and if I think I've got a problem with binding, I'm going to break the binding and rebind them again, right? And it's a matter of seconds, and I don't have to touch the machine. So you have the dsconfig LDAP. This is for tying into an open directory server. There's a lot of operands in it. Be very careful here. You can see that I have a -p. I have a password command in here. If you're going to embed the password into a script, make sure you and maybe your other IT coworkers are the only ones that are seeing this, because it's clear text. It's clear text when you're sending it out as well, unless in ARD you tell it to encrypt traffic. Under 10.8, traffic was unencrypted by default. Under 10.9, it's encrypted by default. So just be careful of sending this command out. But here's several different operands, and the dsconfig LDAP command is extremely powerful. You have a couple of ways to verify binding. So we talked about the discal command a little bit earlier, Directory Services Command Line. Very powerful command that lets you traverse the entire directory structure, whether it's Open Directory or Active Directory. So I can look at the client records, I can look at the machine records, I can look at the user records. Okay, if you do an ID and the username, it's going to give you feedback saying, yep, they exist. Right? It's a quick test to make sure that you're tied into directory services properly. If you do the ID-U, it just shows you their UID, Unix ID. Okay, so ID and discal commands, easiest ways to do the checking here. You can use dirt to verify the user authentication. Be careful when you use the dirt command. It logs the password to the logs. So it's permanent record in your log files on that system. Okay, if you're having problems with Kerberos, you can use the kinit command to force a connection, force a TGT, Kerberos ticket granting ticket. You can do the klist command that shows you all the Kerberos tickets that you have on your system currently. And you can do the kdestroy command to blow out all the tickets and restart again. Is this the same thing as going into Ticket Viewer? Absolutely. But you'll find that this is extremely fast, and it's not a sudo command. Just launch terminal, kdestroy, then do a kinit and a klist, and you're back in business again. The whole binding process has a number of steps that we usually put into the script, and I've got the steps listed there, which is why it's a good thing to have the slides too. But we're basically saying go into directory utility, set up the search path, do a defaults write, tell it that LDAP v3 is active or Active Directory, right? Depending on which one that we're actually using. Use dsconfig LDAP to bind into the servers, and then do a CPS search path to make sure that it's viewing what you think it should view on your LDAP server. It's seeing it in the right order. Now you can use the ID command at this point as well. Now, from time to time, whether it's a Mac server or a Mac client, you find that it doesn't bind to your domain controller properly, right? You go to join it, and you say, well, it looks like it's bound. Why isn't everything working? And that's because Kerberos didn't fire off. So it's not getting a ticket granting ticket from Kerberos. So I've given the command that we use here. It's the single sign-on utility that we use, and it forces it into Kerberization. So if it's a server module from the Mac side, forces it into Kerberization on the Active Directory domain controller. Okay, we already talked about discal. When you are doing binding to Active Directory, it is dsconfig AD. The command looks almost identical, but it's not using dsconfig LDAP, right? So it's just two different commands that we use to do it, but it's in the exact same order that we saw previously. Now, lastly, we got 4 minutes, so I'm cutting it a little close. You have some specific options. Now, this really depends on what version of OS X you're running, right? Because earlier versions, 10.9 does a pretty good job without needing this, but earlier versions, 10.8 and below, you had to tell it from the command line to turn on packet signing. You had to tell it from the command line to turn on packet encryption to show it where the namespace was. Hey, don't go back to the domain controller and pull credential information. Pull it from the local domain controller, right? And the last one, pass interval. A lot of Windows administrators had this problem. How do I change the password? How do I synchronize the password on a Mac with my domain controller? Because we've got it set every 90 days to ask for a new password, so I'm making my users go to a PC and do their password change and come back to the Mac. This command puts it on the same sync interval. It queries the domain controller and it says, when's this password going to change next? And it puts it in the Mac operating system and leverages the users and groups preference pane to change their password. Okay? So now we don't have that disconnect any longer. Was that too slow? I know. I have a lot of material to cover. Okay, any questions? Yes, sir.
One comment, one question.
Okay.
LaunchD stuff, Lingon, great tool for that, and helps to learn what you should be doing in LaunchD.
Yeah, so with LaunchD, Lingon is a great graphical interface utility that helps you to build LaunchD items. Okay.
And the question, going back to earlier, push
Uh-huh.
command, I didn't see the command.
Okay.
What is it?
Thank you. I was going to look it up. Now I don't need to. All right, so it's help push.
Push D. Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. So if you guys want copies of the curriculum, just give me your email address or leave me your business card, and please take these glass cleaners. and mouse pads or drink holders. Thank you.
There was no way I got all that.
I took notes, but not fast
I know, we go through so fast, and that's usually, people always say, can you give us a printout next time? I'm like,